2008, my friend, Pastor Chu Huang, got himself in big trouble. Pastor Ju was then the education pastor at PPC, Praise Presbyterian Church in Somerset, New Jersey. Well, how does a young pastor from a nice suburban town in New Jersey get himself in trouble? Well, he and a student pastor went to Korea with a short-term mission team of 8 youth group girls. They were looking, that's trouble by itself, yeah. They were looking forward to their mission trip. They had been introduced to a children's home located in the city of Mungyong in North Gyeongsang Province. Some call these orphanages, but we call them children's homes or social welfare centers for children. This is because a big majority of these children are not in fact orphans. 70%, sometimes 80+% of the residents have at least one living parent. But they still live in these facilities because their parents cannot raise them. Reasons vary: economic hardships, divorce, alcoholism, mental disabilities, and so on. At the time, government statistics estimated that there were approximately 20,000 children living in such facilities. Pastor Ju and the team wanted to reach out to these children. They wanted to share the love of Jesus Christ with them. And so they prepared for weeks. They prepared an English vacation Bible school program for them. They bought and packed gifts, VBS decorations, materials to do crafts, snacks, American snacks, etc., etc. After a long flight, they landed in Incheon International Airport. They were both exhausted and excited. But the news that they heard shortly after their arrival was devastating. They learned that the organization that had arranged their trip to the children's home in Mungyong had made a big mistake. Because it was such a big misunderstanding, there was no way that they could still go there, let alone do the English VBS. So there was Pastor Ju in Korea with a student pastor, with a team of 8 youth group girls, and he had no place to go. Can you imagine a situation like that? Well, about that day, Pastor Ju now says that God was about to lead them to the, quote, wrong place, unquote, but on the right path. In short order, Pastor Ju learned about a children's home in Seoul that may welcome them. In fact, the Dongmyeong Children's Social Welfare Center had an opposite problem. A group of college students was supposed to come and offer English tutoring to residents. Apparently they could not come. So thinking that it was God's plan all along, Pastor Ju told the Dongmyeong staff he contacted all about themselves. Before long, they were invited to come to Dongmyeong. Do you remember I said he was in big trouble? That's plural, not singular. Big trouble. Well, contrary to his expectations, Pastor Ju's troubles had just begun. When they arrived at Dongmyeong, the first trouble came from the adults. When he met them, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, they asked where the pastor was. 목사님 어디 있어요? You see, they were expecting an older gentleman in suit and tie, like a typical Korean pastor. They were surprised, to say the least, that this young man, looking barely 30 years old, was the pastor they were expecting. Well, a few awkward laughs solved that problem. But what came next was worse. The first time they were introduced to the Dongmyeong children, they could tell that the children were not in a welcoming mood. Some of them looked indifferent, but others looked almost hostile. Soon, Pastor Ju learned the reason why. Volunteers visit, sponsors come, but of all such people, the children liked the people from churches the least. They had come to know that church people come around, hand out some gifts, take many pictures, and leave, never to return. So these children had come to possessed such a sense of mistrust that when they learned that these visitors were from a church, from America no less, they had no interest in listening to them or spending time with them. My guess is that at this point, Pastor Jew was really, really afraid, thinking that this trip could be a total waste of effort and money. How could he explain all this to the church folks back home? Tanghui, how can you talk to them about this? A huge mistake by the people who initiated the program for them, which in turn led them to an unplanned place and children who were hostile to church people. So in desperation, he asked for 10 minutes to speak to the older children. So he explained that the mission team girls spoke very little Korean. And so to make the VBS happen for the younger children at Dongmyeong, the older children, had to help. He basically told them, you have to be the translators. I'm sure he knew that these children didn't speak English, but still, he wanted some cooperation. All of the children listened for 10 minutes, as promised, and left without saying anything. It seemed like they were not interested at all. Next 5 slides, slowly please, next 5 slides. But miraculously, all 12 teenagers who listened showed up the next morning wearing their VBS staff shirts. A good shirt does wonders. So for a week, they did the English VBS from 9 a.m. to noon. And in the afternoons, they spent time with the older children, the teenagers. One time, the Dongmyeong youth members took the mission team girls out on a day tour to the city of Seoul. When the time for partying came, they promised that they would be back the following summer. Some older Dongmyeong kids were, to say the least, skeptical, because that was the typical farewell promise from many people they had met, including their own parents. But we have been going back every year since. This summer will mark the 10th annual visit to Dongmyeong for us. Next slide. Not only that, since 2011, we have been inviting some of them to come visit us in America for about 2 weeks each time. Since last year, we've been doing this twice a year. We call this Flying Happiness Trip. People mostly misunderstand this name. People think that this Flying Happiness is all about the kids who come and they fly, obviously, to different places, and they're happy. No. The name of this trip is called Flying Happiness because we consider these children as God's happiness and our happiness. So when they're about to come, we know that a bunch of happiness for us and for God are flying to us. That's why we call it Flying Happiness. In 2012, that happiness from God inspired Pastor Ju and me, as well as other people who love these children, to start a not-for-profit organization called YANA Ministry, Y-A-N-A Ministry, to tell these children, you are not alone in more concrete ways. For example, since 2014, we have been inviting students from Dongmyeong to live with us in New Jersey so they can study in the States, fully funded and supported. We have 3 students at this point, one who started 3 years ago in middle school, so she's a high school freshman right now, and 2 others who attend college. This fall, we'll welcome 2 more, and we're hoping that we can bring over as many as we can. A long way from indifference and near hostility, mistrust, just because we were from a church. Some of you may be wondering why I'm talking about Yana. What does that have to do with the vision for the next generation of Korean American churches? I promise you there is relevance. But before I get to that, I want to tell you another story, my story. How a baby born in a Buddhist family got to meet Jesus and is standing in front of you now. I was diagnosed with glaucoma before I was 100 days old. I know this because I was told that my 100th day celebration, 100일 잔치, took place at the hospital with some nurses. From then on, it was a continuing saga of surgeries and recoveries. In fact, my mother quit counting after surgery number 22. Most of the sight in my left eye was lost due to a surgical mistake shortly after I turned 1. Although surgeries and medication helped me maintain some eyesight in my right eye, its retina detached when I was 7 years old. A retina is a thin, membrane-like tissue that converts light the eye receives into neural signals and sends them to the brain for visual recognition. And don't worry, I didn't understand what I just said either. I just looked that up from the internet. To say the least, it's just a very important thing so that you can see. Back then, in Korea, the only way to repair detached retina was to sew it up by hand. We tried this surgery twice. Each time, the post-surgery recovery took at least 6 weeks. For the entire time, I had to lie in bed with my head totally immobilized. The idea was that the newly sewn retina had to be given ample time to heal. Now, those of you who have kids, just imagine telling your 7-year-old son this. Listen, you need to lie down in this bed. We're going to fix your head so you can move it. Now, don't worry, we'll feed you, and we'll bring you a bedpan. And your son says, how long do I have to do this? You say, hey, listen, a bit long, not 6 hours, not 6 days. It might take about 6 weeks. Do you know what's going to happen? Very, very hard thing. I'm sure it was much, much harder for my parents than me. After I was permitted out of bed, I had to learn to walk again through painful physical therapy because my legs had atrophied. Despite all those efforts, not to mention paying enough money to buy a house each year for 8 years, I lost my sight, all of it, when I was 9 years old. But what do you know? It was because I became blind that I met Jesus early in life. As I mentioned, my family was Buddhist. My grandmother was such a good Buddhist that she donated money to build a rather large temple which still exists in the city of Jinju. How then did I hear about Jesus? Well, it was 3 things. It was my desire to be free, my hunger for nourishment, and many people's love for the Lord. Well, first, I lived in a dormitory at a school for the blind in Seoul. Every Monday evening, there was a worship service in the auditorium. If I attended it, I did not have to stay in my room studying. So it was a choice between being locked up for 90 minutes or go to this Christian service. So my desire for freedom won out. Second, you cannot overlook the temptation of things to eat when it comes to attracting people to worship. That's right. They gave away snack foods after the service. So I went for the food. Thirdly, and obviously most importantly, quite a number of people prepared and came every week to share the gospel with the blind students. That's what made a real difference. They talked about Jesus. They sang with us about having peace like a river and taught us about the grace of God that came to all mankind through the life, death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Looking back, though, it was also their own acts of grace that broke through the shells of sadness and guided us to the altar of grace. What is grace? Well, other than it being the name of the beautiful woman I live with, Grace, it is action that costs the giver everything. Yet, grace makes all the difference in the lives of those who receive it free of charge. The volunteers came not only for Monday evening service, they also came to take us out on outings. They bought us meals that were far better than dormitory food. Here's food. They spent time with us, listening to our angst and complaints. Above all, they treated us like real people, not like others who, at best, shied away from us because our blindness made them uncomfortable, and certainly not like those who treated us with contempt and cursing because they thought that the blind would bring them bad luck. Yes, through the love of these volunteers, I came to know what grace was and met the Lord Jesus. With the gospel came dreams of a better future, a brighter future. I dreamed that I would become the first blind person to win the annual title to the academic quiz competition. I don't know if any of you remembers this. There was, I don't know if it still is, MBC 장학 quiz. Does anybody know that? It happened all year round, and you could be the annual champ. I was hoping I could do that. I vowed to be the first blind student to ever win admission to the Seoul National University. Well, back then, blind students couldn't even apply there. My dream about a career did not match my mother's dream. My mother hoped that I could learn to play the piano and become a music teacher at a school for the blind. No, that was not huge enough. I wanted to be the first Korean. See, there's a lot of first stuff here. The first Korean to win the Chopin competition and become a world-famous concert pianist. Having no musical talent whatsoever was beside the point. Do you know how many of those dreams came true? That's right, none. But God had something better in mind. Next slide. I won no quiz competition. Instead, I got a chance to come to the United States and study, thanks to a Scottish missionary named Barry Flitcroft. I never had a chance to apply to the Seoul National University, but I was admitted to 4 of the most prestigious universities in the world: Harvard, MIT, Princeton, and UPenn, and I could study at 2 of those schools. Maybe not as cool as a concert pianist performing on the world stages to thunderous applause, but I have been making a living as an investment analyst on Wall Street for 23 years. God's grace and plan guided a dreamy blind boy to who I am today. But I have never seen God, and that has nothing to do with the fact that I cannot see. There were times when I thought that I heard his voice speaking to me during prayers, but it has been the hearts, the efforts, and the perseverance of God's many people who brought me so much farther than anyone ever imagined. All those volunteers who came to visit us at the School for the Blind, the Scottish missionary I mentioned, who made connections and introductions. Next 2 slides. The Omersher family who took me in and with no legal papers whatsoever adopted me as one of their own children. My prayer for my children is that they too will become people whose faiths make their lives different and the lives of others much, much better. Some of you may be starting to see some relevance of these stories to the vision for the next generation Korean American churches. Let me make it clearer. In 2003, my wife and I moved from Manhattan to a town in New Jersey called Summit. Next slide. From that time, we attended 3 churches that had some sort of a small group system. House churches, 사랑방, that's 찬양교회, PPC, 목장, and care group. Care group is ours at True Life. Our experiences have been a mixed bag. At first, we were members of a very well-organized group with a very nice leader couple. We felt that the group was tight-knit, each person doing a good job of sharing and listening. Generous sharing of resources was fairly evenly distributed among some members, and most importantly, there was some spiritual sharing and growing taking place because of the small group. Other times, the small group was mostly about the leader couples providing most of the resources, like the venue for the meeting, the meals that they shared, and the efforts, much effort to reach out to many people. Such a group would last a year or to many years, depending on how long the leaders can persevere without burning out. Since early this year, Grace and I have been serving as co-leaders of a care group. Our group is made up of young English-speaking couples with small children. Okay. Next 5 slides, we'll go slowly. Next 5 slides. As you can see, I've been putting up pictures of people. When it comes to finding pictures of small groups, we could find mostly pictures of children, parties, and tables laden with food. I suppose there's nothing wrong with small groups focusing on children, celebrating together from time to time, and sharing meals. But in a way, these reflect the major functions of some Korean American churches, especially in the suburbs. What people face are the normal, ordinary challenges and stresses of living in a Korean American subculture. Whether you grew up in the United States or came as adults from Korea, your main concerns include careers, marriages, having children, and raising them to enjoy all the advantages you can provide for them. Other concerns may include occasional illnesses and injuries, conflicts among colleagues or extended family members, aging parents, and the like. These concerns mostly are what we talk about during small group meetings. That is good as far as they go, because you do need to share what's bothering you with people closest to you. And you can share these concerns and exchange prayer requests and pray for each other. To be sure, we also talk about what we're grateful for. We talk about things like what God is doing in our lives. But in comparison, these are much less. Another subtle yet powerful need is appearing to be successful in life to others, and more importantly to selves. Social media doesn't really help here. Pictures of vacations in cool places on Facebook and Instagram generate not only envy, but a sense of either keeping up or failing to live up to the standards of today's American dream. By the way, my family will be putting up some pictures from Utah and the Yellowstone National Park this July. You're supposed to laugh about that. I'm being sarcastic about my family. So when I was asked to deliver this message, I thought hard about what Korean American churches are to people today in this culture. This is what I came up with. Churches are immigrant community centers. These are community centers for immigrant families. We spend time together with those who share our language, culture, favorite foods, and values. For example, of raising our children, educating them to the best of our abilities. We exchange information about where to send our kids for scholastic enrichment, what doctors to go to for certain expertise, and so on and so on. Churches also serve as safe places where our children can grow with those whose families share our values. I have met many couples who come to church for precisely with this purpose. Their childhood in churches was okay, and so they might have wandered off from church for a long time, including college years and so on, but when they have kids, they come back because they think that raising children in the same kind of environment they remembered is a good thing. Or if they did not grow up in churches, they like the idea of their children growing up in an environment where there are other children from good Christian families. Finally, churches become places where we can serve God and receive the comforting notion of fulfilling our Christian duties. This in turn leads to the idea that we can ask for and expect to receive blessings from God. Now, this may be a highly cynical view of what churches mean to some people. Yeah, that's a good word. I'm very cynical about a lot of things. But we have met quite a number of people whom we cared for in a small group setting with this kind of mindset. In fact, one woman with whom we worked for a number of years told us recently that by no longer attending church, her life is better, with less trouble and more good things happening. I'm sure that for every one such user of churches, there are dozens of genuine followers of Jesus. But even among most of them, they pursue blessings for themselves and their families. Of course, there's nothing wrong with any of these. What can be wrong with focusing on fellowship and trying to live prayerful lives of service so that we can earn God's favor? We all know that salvation is received by grace alone and cannot be earned. But surely, extra blessings must be earned. No? No? I think that this kind of thinking, especially at the subconscious level, is very hard to escape. As I said earlier, I have no professional credentials to speak on this topic, so you can dismiss this as a sort of like complaints of a person who doesn't know what he's talking about. In matters of theology, I have never even taken a single course. The course that came closest would be the Bible as Literature class I took in college. In matters of practice, I have mostly shied away from taking a more active role in the church. As I was introduced earlier, the most I've ever done is to serve as a leader for adult groups and youth groups. So when it comes right down to it, I'm an ordinary churchgoer, not much more. If you'll forgive me for using flowery language, I would like to think of myself as an ordinary pilgrim who continues to follow the path that God has prepared for him. Along this path, I have met many people whose thoughts, actions, and generosity have helped me in ways only God could imagine. When considering what God has done in my life, I often say the prayer that King David offered to the Lord. Who am I, O sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me so far? He brought me very far indeed, from a young blind boy in Korea with few prospects to a man with his own family, enviable educational background, career on Wall Street, and opportunities to serve God through writing, speaking, and helping others. God, however, did not do any of this by magical means. He did all this through the hard work of his many people. The Omershers, as a prime example, took me in, I'm sure, at first because they considered it to be the Christian thing to do. They parented me through the teenage years, hard teenage years, rebellious teenage years, uncooperative teenage years. Even now, the Omersher family treats me as their own. This is why I consider my part in Yana ministry. I'm sorry, I need to restate that. Our part, Grace's and mine, I need to be very clear about this because her work is much, much harder than mine. I just conduct board meetings and talk about money and things like that. It's Grace who's actually raising Yejin for us, and she also is taking charge of the YSTEP, which is the Yana Study Abroad program. So she's actually in charge of all these students that we bring over in one way or the other. So our part in Yana ministry to be God ordained. Our dream is just that God used his people to bring a blind boy from Korea so far in life. He will use many Yana people to take many Yana children very far in faith and in life. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, God told all of us, you are not alone. In concrete ways, it is our turn to deliver this message. You are not alone. God is with you because we, his people, are with you. To those who have been abandoned by their families, we have been commanded to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to all the world. I'm sure that people do so in many different ways, but I do not know a better way than satisfying people's needs, thus demonstrating Christ's love. Actions speak louder than words, they say. Jesus showed his love through action. Even before his sufferings on the cross, he fed the hungry, healed the sick, and raised the dead. And he did one more thing. Next slide. This is the last slide, I think. To show the extent of his love, Jesus washed feet of his disciples. I could not find a picture of this touching scene, so I asked my 12-year-old son to draw one. You know, if any of you wants to buy it, and he might be a famous artist someday. I'm told that washing someone else's feet was something even the lowliest servant would not do at that time. But Jesus humbled himself so low and washed their feet. Then he told them to wash each other's feet. What he was saying, I think, to them and to us is that we should love each other to the extent that he loved us. If we do, how could the name of him we serve not be revered to the point of bringing many people to the altar of grace? I've been told over and over and over again that the main mission of a church is to bring the unsaved to salvation. I pray the next generation Korean American churches can do this by meeting the needs of those who are poor, abandoned, excluded from the mainstream society, and treated unjustly. My Korean American church experiences, however, have been much more about us, ourselves individually, and the church's specific concerns. I do not suggest that we ignore our own concerns and needs, but Jesus, who promised to hear our prayers and answer them, also talked about others who are hungry, thirsty, strangers, in need of clothes, sick, or imprisoned. We desire that God answer our prayers. I pray that Korean American churches will also seek to be answers to prayers. Prayers of those needy souls that God sends our way. I do not believe that all churches should have an orphan ministry, program for the disabled children, a food pantry, a hospital ministry, a prison ministry, or a crisis center for abused women, children, and men. But all churches should be about reaching out to the unsaved. Dr. James said it very well yesterday. Churches should be outward, meeting their needs with genuine, loving hearts is the best way to reach them where it matters, softening their hearts and preparing their souls for salvation. I'd like to close with a short prayer. Will you pray with me? Thank you, Lord, for doing so much for us. We have received countless blessings, including those you granted during tough times. Now extend your mercies and compassions to countless others through us. In this country of dreams and opportunities, on this land of milk and honey, you allowed some 4,000 Korean American churches. Let us be your agent in this country and beyond. Let our hearts be broken for things that break your heart. Let our hands, arms, and feet serve for Christ's sake. Do less for us, do much more through us. In the matchless name of Him, Jesus the Christ, who washed feet. Amen.